Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Lewis Beck. Welcome in to Hybrid Home Studio here on 343 TV. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. For those of you that were here last week or have been here before, welcome back. For those of you that are new, welcome. This is 343 Labs TV. And what this is it's the online educational extension of the school 343 Labs, which is based in New York City and also in Berlin now. And we offer classes in person and online in both locations, although we're definitely offering more in-person stuff in Berlin because New York is still kind of a shit show. We offer classes in Logic, Ableton, synthesis, songwriting, mixing, mastering, you name it, vocal production, honestly everything. So if you've been tuning in recently and you're still getting the lay of the land, but you're liking what you hear and what you see, by all means, please hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. And if you're just tuning in for the first time today and you don't hate me by the end of this, then also hit the subscribe button. All right, so I'm just going to jump right into it. Last week, what we did was I talked about mixing on the fly. And so for those of you who, again, are tuning in for the first time and aren't fully sure what this program is about, it's about combining analog and digital processes for production, right? So it's called Hybrid Home Studio because what I'm doing is I'm working with a lot of external sound sources and such things, like analog synthesizers and analog preamps and compressors and EQs, and kind of teaching you guys and showing you a little bit how to integrate everything into the creative flow of the 21st century music producer. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hop on the chat so I can say what up to you guys. And as always, if you are here, please lob a little bit of a what's up into the chat. I'm here to answer all your questions and your concerns and argue with you just in case you want to do that too. Anyhow, yeah. Let's just go ahead and get going. So what I'm actually going to do is I am going to work on the track that we started last week. And let me jump to that comment section. Let's see. Cool. I'm going to start on this track that we did last week, and I'm going to start exploring how you can apply distortion across your mix to get some pretty cool creative effects, but also to have some pretty cool kind of like engineering effects and such things. First off, I'm going to kind of run through what distortion actually is, and I'm going to talk about all the different types of distortion because there's so many. I'm going to show you some of my favorite distortion plugins and show you what the best ways are to use them. All right, so let's just hop right in. First off, I'm going to just play this track. All right, so you get the idea. First off, let's just talk about like what distortion actually is. So, whether you're working with a distortion plugin or you're doing some, analog overdriving outputs and stuff like that, inputs and outputs, distortion is pretty simply one thing. As long as we're not talking about digital distortion, right? And by digital distortion, I mean like a bit crusher or something like that. So what distortion is effectively analog processing systems, right? Meaning just anything that runs on like electricity, have basically limits to volume that they can produce, right? So, you've been, for instance, just, take your car stereo, right? You can turn the volume up only so loud, right? And sometimes, depending on how loud the song is that you're listening to, you'll get some like crunchiness and you can hear your speakers start to get a little bit wonked out. The more common place that some of you might have encountered this, especially as like electronic producers and DJs, is at like a club or a house party where you're DJing and you want to turn the music up louder, or someone asks you to turn the music up louder, and you keep turning it up and you keep turning it up, and eventually you get to this point where the music stops getting louder, it just starts getting really crunchy, right? So at that point, it's when you have reached your distortion, you've reached kind of your output ceiling limit, right? And what starts to happen is that the audio actually hits this ceiling and then folds back down into the audio, and it kind of squares off. It creates something very similar to square waves, and effectively you start getting this very like pinched sound on the top end, right? And this very kind of boxy sound on the low end, which is sort of what square waves do. So when you're using a digital distortion plugin of any kind, what is happening is it's actually modeling that process. So what I'm going to first do is I'm just going to show you a couple of my favorite distortion plugins, and we're going to start with them on the kick and talk about some cool ways that you can use distortion on a kick. So as you can see, this is totally dry, right? I just tracked this kick last week. And so for now, if I wanted to distort it, right, I could drag on a number of distortion plugins. The ones that I am particularly fond of, I'll actually write these down here in the corner so that you can see them. I like the Decapitator by Sound Toys. I like the Saturn, new one too, by Fab Filter. Also the old one's super nice. And I like the Devastor by D16 Audio Group. I'm probably forgetting quite a few. So let me jump into my plugins and see. And then, oh yeah, I actually really like this Positive Grid plugin. It's kind of random. A lot of people don't know about it. Positive Grid. What's it called? The tube compressor, I believe. Yeah, the PG tube compressor. So when I'm mixing in the box, and I'm trying to create distortion in the box, these are my go-tos. I also have a bunch of other ones that I use that are not actually strictly distortion plugins. And that's one of the things that I'm going to be talking about a little bit later, is how you can overdrive preamps to actually create distortion. So my favorite one for that is the Helios Type 69 from Universal Audio. Oh yeah, and actually, how could I forget? This is probably the best digital distortion. The Thermionic Culture Vulture from Universal Audio. So there's a lot, as you can see, and actually they will also all have different characters and different characteristics, and that's kind of the point. But I'm going to show you some really cool, weird, creative ways to use distortion. And so let's just jump right in, and let's start with your kick drum. So first of all, this is a 909 kick, right? And a distorted 909 kick is one of the most like classic house music sounds that there is. So an easy way to achieve that, right, would be like to take the Decapitator from Sound Toys. And the way that this works is it is modeled off of different preamps, different consoles essentially. So what this is supposedly giving you, right, is console saturation. So this is, I believe, API. This is EMI, which is basically Chandler at this point. That's Neve, Trident, and I always forget what P is. But so they all are going to have slightly different characteristics. So first off, let's just turn up the drive. So as you can immediately hear, just switching from P to A gives you a completely different distortion profile, right? So let's just first crank the shit out of it. to right about there and start going through to see what these different characteristics are. So first of all, like one of the main like reasons that analog gear is coveted is specifically for the like inconsistent harmonics that are generated when you start pushing it subtly into distortion or overdrive, or saturation really would be the correct term. And the thing is that we call this breakup, right? And it literally is the way in which the distortion is textured, right? And so API and Neve are like really, really renowned for the style of their breakup. Very, very popular. But so are a ton of others, right? And so first we're just going to go through and literally not change the style, not change the amount of the drive, but we are going to change the style of the distortion that we're actually selecting. And we're going to listen to how pretty radically different these distortions sound. Right, so that's pretty interesting and pretty cool. We have the exact same amount of signal flowing in, the exact same amount of drive on the circuit, but they have completely different tones. Now, I'll tell you right now from experience working quite a bit with analog preamps and outboard gear and distortion that this is by far the most realistic sounding distortion out of all of these. Yeah, like that Neve doesn't really sound anything like a Neve overdriving to my ears. Now that API sounds super juicy. So first of all, the way that you can use this plugin, right? Very useful way to use it is to just roll back the mix knob. All right, and you can immediately hear how you get so much tone and character just from doing this style, right? Now obviously it's a very, very different style of sound that you're getting here. So you might roll back the mix knob a little bit more. So what distortion will do for a kick drum is kind of give it a little bit more of like that analog dusty flavor if you're into the lo-fi sound. So I like that. It sprinkles a little bit of like, you know, kind of, I guess you would just call it dust essentially on the transient. But it also will distort the transient, right? So sometimes putting distortion directly on is not going to be cool. Now with that being said, we can use the exact same distortion setting, except we'll roll the mixed knob up. And if we use it on a return track, the experience of the distortion is going to be pretty different. Now instead of obscuring the transient, what it's doing is it's adding a little bit more color and detail to it and also making the low end way thumpier. Now it is of course getting louder, right? So we have to acknowledge that. So you'd have to lower it a little bit. But one thing that distortion does is that it allows signals to like cut through the record and remain very solid. So using distortion in parallel is one of my favorite tricks to do in a mix. And it's a great way to add color and detail and saturation without actually like really messing up your transient too much. So one thing that I could do, for instance, would be to literally send this entire track to the same distortion. Which would be kind of cool. So let's see. We're sending this about 17.1. Let's do that on here. That's close enough. All right, so let's check that out. So that obviously just got really crunchy, right? What I'll do is I'll roll it all the way down. And then slowly bring it back in. As you can hear, what that does is it adds tons of color and detail, right, to the sound. Now, the point of this session, this episode, if you will, today, is not to teach you how to do like subtle mixing tricks with distortion. But the point of what I was just showing you is to try to actually demonstrate what distortion can actually do for your song, right? So a lot of people think distortion is just like soaring, guitars with like, Metallica style, hard rock, shit like that. Jimi Hendrix or something. But the thing is that subtle distortion can go a really long way for making your song more interesting and have more character. Right? Now, I personally am obsessed with using analog distortion. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to show you how you can send some of your tracks, especially digital tracks, through outboard gear to actually increase the detail and kind of warmth of the original sound. So let's see. Well, first off, let's just make a nice digital pad. I'm going to use Retro Synth from Logic. I honestly love this synth. I think it sounds absolutely spectacular as far as digital synths go. Let me clean up my desk a little bit, excuse me. All right. So let's see, what key were we working in? I'll just go ahead and drag that up there. So we got this guy going on now. Well, that's super annoying. I apologize. Drop that down. Let's drop it down one more octave. That's super nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it so that it opens and closes. Very strangely. Okay, so let's see. I'm gonna have it open and close every 4 bars. So we should be able to see how much time is that. It's about 8 seconds. So I'll have it open for 4 and close for 4. That should work. So if I want to get a similar sound in the box, first of all, to this analog pad, one thing I'm going to have to do is, first of all, program it similarly. So I got to lift up that cutoff quite a bit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the Universal Audio plugin, Thermionic Culture Vulture, and I am going to throw some distortion on here. So you can hear a little bit of that crackling. Especially when the resonance is sweeping across. But this particular plugin makes these digital synths sound super, super nice. So a little bit of distortion can go a long way. Now, if I put on actual overdrive, we're going to have a crazy different experience. Which is pretty cool. Now, if I roll back the mix a little, let's see how that sounds comparatively. Now, there's a little bit of delay on that as well, so let's throw on some reverb real quick. Let's see. That should do the trick. So right off the bat, right, if you're using combining digital with analog, right, and you're finding maybe that some of your digital stuff isn't holding up with as much power and presence, a great way to make that happen is by using some sort of distortion. Now, what I can do is also take some of this off here, is I can actually create distortion on the way into the box from an analog synth, right? And get a very different sort of distortion profile. So if I were to take this sound and retrack it, think about how I want to do this. I actually think we should be good. Let's see. Yeah, all right, cool. They are coming in. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm effectively going to retrack this sound, but I'm going to create distortion on the way in. So I'm just tracking this from my Rev 2 right now, and I just set a pad setting that I've created. And what I'm going to do is I'm bringing it in through the Universal Audio 710 to infinity preamp, and I'm going to crank the input quite a bit. So as you can hear, we get a slightly different style of distortion here than we got in the box, as you can, guess. And it's not necessarily about one being better than the other. Now, this type of distortion right now is distorting transistors. And so that's literally the type of a component that it's overdriving. Now, if I turn it more towards tube, we're going to get a different type of sound. We get sort of like a burnt wire type of sound, right? Now, why am I showing you all this? Okay, well, first of all, there's something super sick about, at least in my opinion, about analog distortion and being able to incorporate these types of sounds that derive from analog distortion into the box, right? And you do not always have to use aggressive distortion settings in order to create cool results, right? But definitely part of what we're going to be talking about today is how you can. If I were to take a filter, all right, I'm just going to take the one knob from Waves. You get a pretty awesome detailed sound. And now you're not really perceiving the distortion in terms of the high frequencies, but you are getting them on the low frequencies, a lot. So it sounds like a clean sound, but you're effectively getting the analog distortion artifacts that are embedded in these low frequencies. They're going to make your pad more colorful. So in terms of making that really dreamy, swimming kind of atmosphere, distortion, what it allows you to do is create so many artifacts and details and harmonics that even if you roll it off, it can be really beneficial. Alright, so you can hear that we miss it quite a bit when we take it out. So one of the things that I love to teach people here, I'm actually going to just record that real quick because I just have it on the hold button, so it's just playing forever, literally. So as that's recording though, I can talk to you guys a little bit. One of the things that I think most people don't understand about analog gear is that you can use it more than just what its function is for. And to be honest, that's usually when it becomes way more fun. And so, for instance, right, in this case, you can see how squared off, oh, excuse me. You can see how squared off this waveform is. And so it's super stable and thick. Now, the reason that that's actually useful is because it's kind of analogous to limiting, right? So if we talk about what limiting actually is for a second, right? It's just a form of very aggressive compression, right? So compressors with a ratio of 10 or higher are limiting, are limiters. And so if we look at this, this looks like a really aggressively mastered waveform, sort of. Right, it's just a butter stick. There's no dynamics in here. Now also, given it's being sustained, so that's why we're getting some of that. But the reason there's not more like dip to these waves, and if we actually zoom in, we can see literally how squared off all the waves are, right? So this is what the distortion sound is. It's these squared off peaks. And the reason using distortion in a mix or in a production is useful, especially in like dance music and electronic music and hip hop and stuff that like require limiting does. So it decreases the dynamic range really significantly, but it does so in a way that is kind of more natural than a limiter, right? Whereas a limiter is forcing things into this reduction. What distortion is it's naturally creating that the harder and harder that you hit this ceiling. So in practice, it's kind of very, very similar. Or in theory, rather, it's very, very similar, but in practice, it sounds a lot different. Now, my comments section is not working at all, so I'm going to have to try to figure that out. Let's see. All right. So if you are here, drop a message into the chat. I think I should be able to see you now. I'm really sorry about that. All right. Anyhow, moving right along. So the point, right, because this is definitely one of my favorite techniques in terms of using outboard gear for distortion. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send it back through the preamp that I recorded it on. Cool. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'll send it to a return track, and then I will route that output through here. Okay, cool. So now if I solo these, I should just get nothing. Oh, right. Output 5, input 5. Huh. Okay. 9. Alright, that's weird. Why is that not working? Sorry, bear with me for a sec while I troubleshoot this. Wow. Okay, that's weird. Oh. Damn. Okay. I have this multiple output thing so that I can actually hear this stream. Okay. Damn, that's unfortunate. I guess I'm not gonna do that then. Oops. Okay. We can still have fun with this though. So let me think. What's the best way to get this out and back in? So effectively what's happening, for those of you that are like, what the hell is he doing? I am trying to send it out of the computer and back in, but the problem is that I use this multi-output device in my computer to be able to actually hear it on the stream. And so what's now happening is I am not able... Oh, there's the chat. Okay. Yeah, so what's happening is I'm not actually able to route it out of the box and back in, which sucks because that's my favorite thing to do. But that's okay. We can still play with actually blending tones. So if I take a little 909 hi-hat, kind of try to mimic this sound. So this seemed pretty close. And so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to mimic what I would normally do here. And I'm going to drive the input super hard on this preamp. Just like that. So it's purposely crushing the shit out of it, right? You can't hear any of the detail. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to take that distorted signal and I'm going to blend it in with this hi-hat to reinforce the hi-hat and make it a little bit more colorful and rich sounding. So I just got a lot of this nice juicy signal. Now, on its own, that's just kind of a cool sound that I could use. What I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up with the transient here. You can actually kind of see like they have a similar profile right there. So I'll move these on. Now the transient should be lined up, so let's have a listen. So it's this subtle thing where I'm not really making it louder, but what I'm doing is I'm drawing more attention to the transient, and I'm placing a bunch of like really harmonic information, or rather textural harmonic information, rather than like, you know, melodic harmonic information. I call this disto layer. Layering it right on top of it. Okay, now, since I was able to finally access this chat, I did want to actually address something that Jonathan Rodriguez had said, which was about Positive Grid being for guitars. I'm going to open up that plugin right now because this is one of the best plugins that you can use to basically mimic what I just did in the box. So I'll create a return track, turn it up all the way. I'm going to drag on this Positive Grid plugin, tube compressor. And I'm going to solo the return. So Positive Grid is, for those of you who have no idea what this is, it is a guitar company. It's a guitar amp modeling company. So for those of you who are not really in the guitar world or are not overly familiar, right? A lot of people, you know, can't afford really nice amps, can't afford the recording technology required to be able to actually get really nice guitar tones. And so, you know, these digital amps are effectively, you know, designed to allow you to simulate the experience of having your guitar plugged into an amp. And so while you might not think that, you know, off the top of your head that company would be the one that you want to buy distortion from, I actually think that that type of company is the best place to buy distortion. The reason or rather the best place to find like really accurately modeled distortion. And the reason for that is that literally what a guitar amplifier does is it models, or their modeling system rather, is it's based on tube modeling, right? And so if you can create a realistic regurgitation kind of, or realistic emulation rather, of a tube-based guitar amp and its overdrive characteristics, then you basically can use a really nice, create a nice kind of like a tube op amp, which is what this essentially is. And so this is a really sick plugin. I think it sounds the most analog in terms of the breakup of the sound and like the texture of the sound of any distortion plugin by like quite some ways. So check this out. All I'm going to do is, first I'm going to turn up the system bias, because that just affects how basically thick the sound is on this plugin. So as you can hear, first of all, it eats a lot of the low end, this particular plugin, which, you know, therefore not ideal usually to be put directly on the track. It also makes it a lot quieter, right? So even though that's super quiet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this up quite a bit. So again, you can still hear it brightening it. And it's cool about this, you have these different input stages. So now we're pretty much matched. Still a little bit bright. Now, the harder that you drive the input, I'm going to start turning the output down, the more you start getting a distorted sound. And the harder that you drive the output, you can put these tubes on the output stage. Right, you can start getting this really aggressive distortion sound. And now if you really want to create like a super intense distortion tone, what you can actually do is you can just take some clean digital gain, and I'm going to turn the gain way down on the output and crank it on the input. Now there's all of this noise, right, that's starting to be increased from the noise floor that we have just embedded in the recording. So I like that one. And then what I can just do is I can throw on a gate plugin. Actually, I'll use this gate. Maybe need to use the thermionic culture vulture. We're only finally starting. To start getting near that ceiling that you actually need to create this level of distortion. So the reason I'm stacking all these distortion plugins like an absolute psychopath is because what I'm trying to do is demonstrate to you the difference between analog distortion and digital. So this style of breakup where you can basically overdrive the input so much that what happens is all the release just gets, all the sustain just gets completely obliterated, and the release gets completely obliterated. It's really hard to do that digitally, actually. And so digital distortions are super nice because they can actually be a little bit smoother, right, and give you like a more even level of breakup initially. But the thing is that once you get into this territory of trying to create that same crazy style of breakup in the box, can't really do it. And you just kind of get this weird, crazy result. And what's strange is basically that first peak that is happening, right? We're not able to fully drive into distortion. So maybe one thing we could do is we could put the culture vulture before the tubes. Let's see what happens. Very creepy. So you can hear you can actually hear now push to a complete point of being overwhelmed. Oh, we're getting close. There we go. That's interesting. We're actually getting it from here. That's super crazy. I don't know if that's necessary for this style of music. Yeah, but so basically we can now get that snap. And so let's see how that sounds when we blend it back in. Now compared to this hi-hat, right? So now what also happens is you hear this crazy low frequency shit that's starting to happen. Right? You see that big bump down there, which actually is, to be fair, very reminiscent of actual analog distortion. So maybe what I would do is shelve it out. So keep a little bit of it to give it the weight. But when you cut distortion, it gets really harsh really quickly if you use high-pass filtering or low-pass filtering. Well, especially high-pass filtering. So let's see. Let's take this and bring it into the project. Cool. So this is now the digital analog emulation distortion that we created. And that's the actual analog distortion. So if we combine those two, there's this weird little coupling that's happening up high. Doop, doop. So maybe we could get rid of that, like right here. Kind of. Anyway, that's just me being crazy. So you can get rid of that. But when we combine these two styles of distortion now, what you're left with is a really, really detailed, defined, and stable drum sound, right? I think this one was just a little loud to begin with, the high frequencies. Yeah, so I think choosing either one, you get a slightly different feeling, but you can still get a pretty nice approximation of the analog effect kind of by doing that. Yeah, so unfortunately what I really wanted to do today, I didn't actually realize wouldn't work, which was sending things out of the box and bringing them back in and stuff like that. But I hope that nonetheless, what I was able to show you was at least kind of useful and cool. Now, before we go, I do want to show you what some of these analog like preamp emulations can sound like when you overdrive them. So if I turn off that entire plugin chain and just put on the Universal Audio Helios channel, this actually can get us pretty close to that really like overdriven preamp sound. Still can't fully get us there though. It's hard to get these to snap. So yeah, part of like what's awesome about an analog preamp is that it literally creates this like, it won't accept any more information once it gets past that point, and you're just left with this like aggressively distorted preamp. So what I recommend doing is if you have any sort of analog preamp situation, to, just play around with like taking a drum sound and sending it out of the box in through there and retracking it, and then essentially blending those two sounds together. You can do that with splice samples. Like one of the main things that I do when people send me mixes, a lot of the time is it's very kind of like weak, thin sounding digital stuff. And so I will just kind of spend the first hour and a half or two passing everything through analog gear just to get the bass tone. I don't mean basses in the frequencies, just but like, the bass layer tone to be something that's a little bit warmer, richer, more stable, that kind of stuff, right? So at the end of the day, like I think the main benefit of digital is precision but the main benefit of analog is kind of like stability of tone. Now, what I don't mean consistency of tone, right? So digital is good for consistency of tone, but analog is really good for stability of tone. So all that means is that there's like kind of a natural harmonic relationship that's captured and expressed more often than not in some sort of analog recording. And you can 100% mimic that digitally these days by just like using crazy combinations of plugins. But one thing that I'd recommend doing, is like don't just take a distortion plugin and drag it on and say, okay, that's good. Like try to layer distortions and try to explore what happens to the digital plugins once you push them to their absolute limit. Because the ones that are actually really good emulations will start behaving in really interesting ways. So again, I apologize because I wasn't able to actually execute what I was hoping to be able to fully do today. But I still hope that nonetheless it was at least a little bit of a useful demonstration of how you can apply distortion both digitally and from analog to, enhance your creative process, but also to enhance your mixes. And so, next week I'm going to be back. And I am actually not 100% sure what the topic is going to be, but stick to our check our Instagram, and we'll be keeping you guys updated on that. We also are going to be giving out a prize this week. I believe it is a gift certificate for, let me see. I think it's for the Arturia synth collection. I'm not 100% sure, but check back. Tune in on Friday. Thank you everyone for tuning in. This has been a hybrid home studio with me, Lewis Beck, here on 343 TV. And there you go, Lewis Beck. And if you dug the content and you've been digging the content overall from all our other instructors, then please subscribe. And, if you feel like you may be ready to actually take a full course with us and really step up your production game, then go to 343labs.com and see whether or not you can take an online class or an in-person class in New York or Berlin. And that's all I got for today. So thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next week.